The creative mind has always been central to the Irish personality. In the past, the poverty of the temporal world perhaps led to a greater concentration on the world of the imagination. Today, however, in contemporary Ireland, that innate creativity has been channeled into other areas such as business, science and technical innovation. And the new, economically vibrant country has benefited hugely. Irish creativity itself has also become economically successful, with the likes of U2 becoming international brand names. But now, in this rapidly changing world, what has become of the Ireland of saints and scholars, of poets and dreamers? In the rush of material success, has that elusive Irish spirit evaporated like the mythical Mountain Dew?
Why were we particularly proud of being Irish? Obviously, in a sense, it must be related to history, but I think it was more related to a particular feeling about people, which was a little bit different. And also a recognition that we made a rather bigger impact on the world in many ways, at that time primarily through our missionaries, for an example, but also through our writers, than might be expected of a very small country.
There's more to it. Back in the history in terms, we've always been storytellers. Storytellers preserve your history and culture, make you proud of where you came from. And there's a specialness to that, which I feel, which I think every Irishman feels, and you're trying to get me to articulate it. It's a little different. I think it's part of adversity, but I think it's part of this storytelling culture that binds us together. Because if you tell stories, you build relationships. You keep putting roots back into the soil, even if that soil is foreign soil, because they're Irish stories.
The importance of the word in song and story has always had a preeminence in the Irish psyche. In the face of colonisation, poverty and emigration, the telling of tales became a way of preserving one's identity and shared heritage. Today, some would argue that the significance of cultural endeavour has been severely diminished by an increasing focus on material wealth.
It's certainly true that for a comparatively small population, Ireland has produced a very high rate of very high-level writers, and this has been going on for far too long for it to be considered a coincidence or a flukish blip. In other words, many of the people whom you study as the greats of English literature are actually Irish people, and I think that's a distinctive and huge contribution. In that sense, the notion of the Irish as a nation of poetic, talented people has some grounding in reality.
Everybody's writing novel, or has a poem in them, or has a play in them, or has a story in them at any rate, and certainly has a dream. And that's where the cliche of we are the music makers, we are the dreamer of dreams ceases to be a cliche. There is a certain sociological, psychological reality about this inherent creativity in a lot of art.
The sense of mystery that came with Irish mythology. Cuchullans and so on. I mean, that was an important part of all of our lives growing up, or at least of mine. I mean, my father reading me stories of Cuchullan, I still remember, waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Of course, if you're in a culture of storytellers, who wanna talk to you until you agree with something. I mean, I think that's why Irish are so good at business. Because they keep talking till the other person can't stand it anymore, and they say, okay, whatever, whoever they're dealing with. If they're in Japan, the Japanese will say, hey, finished. They can't do it anymore. Can't listen to this Irish guy spinning his circles anymore. And then, of course, the anecdotal becomes preeminent. And the theatre is so strong. There are so many playwrights, there are so many poets.
I'm the least funny person in my family, by far. And so that valuation of humor, to actually get a word in edgewise at the dinner table, you better not only have a story to tell about what happened at school, but you better tell it in a fashion that's going to actually win you the respect of your peers. And so that took, you raise your game, I suppose, at the dinner table.
That's Roger Brook.
When I lived in Canada, I was very struck by the fact that Canadians were obsessed by being confused with Americans and with self-definition of why we're different from Americans. I don't think we are, even though we're English-speaking. I think we've got more of a sense of ourselves than that. But it's not something that it would be not smart to take it for granted. It would be not smart to invest in our own culture and in stimulating the creativity within that culture.
Dorothy Cross is one of the country's foremost visual artists with a substantial international reputation. But growing up in Cork City, in an Ireland where the literary tradition was central, ideas of beauty or visual art seem very remote from her experience.
We didn't have the Louvre in the middle of Cork City, so I always thought art was elsewhere. It wasn't in Dublin either. Ireland didn't seem to have it. And even though I went away, I went away at the age of 18, then went to England to do undergraduate and went to America to do postgraduate. And, at that young age of 18, I kind of thought that's what you did. And even when I came back, I remember going, where is the art? See, I think the visuals are still in a very uncomfortable state. There's an ancient connection to the visual in this culture. Now it's contaminated by the market too, which makes it even more difficult for people, any person, to know what it is they're looking at. People in the Western world are too interested in money these days to bother their Barneys, to have faith in wanting art to happen. And yet, what the impoverishing that occurs through that is sad. That people are more interested in having a fancy Jeep than possibly having an experience that might change the way they look at the world. There's something about art that, when it's good, it's about, because it's all tied into the unconscious, it's all tied into fear, it's all tied into imagination and lack of control, that is taboo, There's something about minding, actually, too, that in terms of Irishness, we mind too much. We're a strange culture. I think there's a terrible tendency to mind what people think about us now, that maybe wasn't there in the old days, I don't know. When people are afraid of art, they say, oh, she's mad, or it's mad, because they can't cope with it. And I'm particularly, I guess, actually, it is an annoying thing when that word is used, because you have to be out of the conscious mind to be an artist anyway, because you have to rely on the unconscious. So when nature presents itself and the unconscious presents themselves, then you're way in a hack. It's fantastic. That's the day that, you knew. It's kind of an insecure place to be. But the thing is, people think maybe that's brave or that's mad or whatever. But actually, what happens when you know it's transformed into something that's interesting, then you're safe. Then you go into comfort. My pull in my heart is towards the ocean. It's about the life that lives below there that is so kind of little seen. It's about kind of trying to access that. It's also about a power that is beyond us, you know. It's so volatile and fantastic. And it's passion, I suppose, isn't it? It's about whatever Byron wrote about. It's about all that.
The physical landscape of the island of Ireland has always held a special fascination for artists. But it has also embodied and inspired the spiritual impulse in the Irish. Today, with Ireland becoming an increasingly globalised and secular society, is that traditional notion of Ireland as a spiritual place being consigned to history and becoming the stuff of myth and legend, along with the fairies and the little people. Deep in the Bavarian countryside lies the studio of one of the leading painters of our time. Sean Scully's journey has brought him from Dublin to London to New York and now here to rural tranquility outside Munich. His highly abstract work strives to capture a sense of primitive spirituality, which he can trace back to his Irish origins. While the notion of the Irish as an artistic people is a popular one, Irish art is primarily associated with a literary tradition rather than a visual one.
Aristotle says, to see is to know. So the seeing knowledge is to know something. You can write the whole history of the world and you can put it under your bed. But you can't paint the whole history of the world and put it under your bed. You need a big hall for that. That means that it comes of age to claim me. But look at these things. They're not exactly convenient. You know, you can't put one in your suitcase. You can't smuggle these around. They can't be contraband like the written word. The written word can be hidden, stuffed in your back pocket. Symbolically, these paintings are, in a sense, the first authentically international paintings, let's say, made by an Irish person. And the forms I use go back in a way to a kind of druid sensibility that's been commented on. I'm always using these massive forms, and they have some kind of spiritual charge. I always had the sense that things were special, that things were full of spirit, that everything in some way was sacred. I think that now. I think that the world is a sacred place, and that is profoundly embedded in me, and I work from that. When I'm painting, I think of my paintings as transformative and made with the possibility however faint, of making the world a better place. So I'm not simply in the art scene. I'm doing something else that's maybe bigger. The river in the Amazon is not just a river, it's full of spirits for the people that are there. And the holy water for us when we entered the church wasn't just water. It was potent, it was filled with spirit. I think it's an imaginative and spiritual condition. And I'm very attached to it, to Ireland.
There's a spirit in Ireland that I've never felt anywhere else, and that feeds my own spirit and energizes me, and that's what I take with me no matter what I do.
It's a sense that there is much more to life than simply being the highest level of the animal life, if you like. Much, much more. There is a huge spiritual dimension. I see it much more now because I travel internationally. I see the importance of religion, of different religions in people's lives, and the yearning for a greater connection between peoples and an explanation of that connection.
I think for a long time, one of the key themes in Irish self-image, certainly Irish nationalist self-image, and one of the key attractions of Ireland for many people from other parts of the world, was a perceived spiritual dimension, an anti-materialism, something that was perhaps anti-modern, something that celebrated values which went older, which were deeper, which were more importantly human in spiritual ways.
It's easy to be cynical about the way that the saints and scholars' spiritual side of Irish life and Irish consciousness has been branded, because it has been branded by the extremely powerful tourism industry. But all this isn't based on nothing. It is based, I think, on a very long tradition of the way Irish people spend their spare time. The amount of time devoted to reading, the amount of time devoted to storytelling in the sense of putting a shape on experience.
So in a way, literature, in English or in Irish or in Latin, and art generally was an attempt, you could say, to respond to the experience of confusion and division and invasion and violation. And I think one of the great things about the Irish mind is that it has been obsessed with questions, which prompts us and propels us to constantly invent new solutions to a problem that refuses to be solved. So I think the question of Irish identity is a wonderfully productive one, as long as it doesn't become self-obsessive and as long as it doesn't lead to violence. And very often, you know, there are two responses to division. One is violence, which is to force a solution. The other is poetry, to imagine a solution. What is it Yeats says, you know, that the quarrels with ourselves produce poetry. The quarrels with others produces politics.
You have to have a base. I think there's a wonderful base in the history, the culture, the literature. And you then feed off that, number two, with the reality of the Irish people. And you know, I live here in the US. I get the stories all the time of the people who go for the first time to Ireland and the welcoming that they get. And my goodness, we must never lose that.
We imagined a world that maybe never was and never could be. But in doing that, it stretched our own personal imagination. And I think that that's not just true of our literary giants, but I think it also is true of our business people and our scientists. I mean, it's the challenge to do something that is demanding.
The Irish experience would appear to be moving further and further away from this image of Ireland as a nation of storytellers and dreamers towards a more materialist future vision. Yet paradoxically, creativity seems to be a driving force in all aspects of the Irish mind. The capacity to imagine, the facility to relate to others, and the ability to understand and articulate one's own experience all remain dynamic factors in Irish life today. The creative, the spiritual, the imaginary all remain important aspects of the elusive Irish mind.